The morning mist clung to the Gothic spires of Ravenshollow Academy, like secrets refusing to be told. Detective Grimshaw stood at the wrought iron gates, his weathered coat damp from the October air, watching as demolition crews prepared to tear down what had once been New England's most prestigious boarding school. But this wasn't just another building scheduled for destruction. This was the site of one of the most baffling disappearances in modern history. Before we begin this investigation, I encourage you to subscribe to Detective Grimshaw Mysteries and ring that notification bell. These are the cases they tried to bury, the mysteries they hoped time would forget. But Detective Grimshaw never forgets. It was October 15th, 1998, when 28 students from Ravenshollow Academy's senior class simply vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle, no ransom demands, no bodies ever found. The official investigation lasted 3 years before being quietly closed, filed away as a cold case with no answers. But today, as workers prepared to demolish the century-old academy, someone would finally break their 25-year silence. The call had come to Detective Grimshaw at dawn. Sarah Chen, the demolition site supervisor, had discovered something that made her blood run cold. As her crew cleared the academy's basement, they'd found a hidden door behind a false wall. Beyond that door lay a network of tunnels that shouldn't exist, and evidence of something far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined. "Detective," Sarah greeted him at the main entrance, her hard hat in her hands, face pale despite the morning chill. "I've been in construction for 20 years, but I've never seen anything like this. The tunnels extend beneath the entire campus. Some of them go down 3 levels. Grimshaw nodded, his steel-gray eyes already scanning the building's facade. "Show me everything, Miss Chen. Leave nothing out." They descended into the academy's basement through what had once been the maintenance area. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the musty scent of decades-old secrets. Sarah led him to where her crew had been working to clear the foundation. There, partially hidden behind old heating pipes, was an opening that had been carefully concealed with matching stonework. "We almost missed it," Sarah explained, shining her flashlight into the darkness beyond. "If Jake hadn't been checking for structural damage, we never would have found the loose stones." Detective Grimshaw stepped through the opening and immediately understood why this discovery had shaken the construction crew. The tunnel beyond was not some forgotten storage area or old utility passage. It was deliberately constructed, with electric wiring still intact and air vents that suggested regular use. The walls were lined with photographs, dozens of them. Students in their Ravenshollow uniforms, but not the cheerful yearbook portraits one might expect. These photographs showed the missing 28 in what appeared to be some kind of ceremony or gathering. Their faces were blank, expressionless, as if they were looking at something beyond the camera that filled them with a mixture of fear and fascination. "My God," Grimshaw murmured, studying the images with his magnifying glass. Each photograph was dated, creating a timeline that began in September 1998 and continued right up until their disappearance in October. But it was the final photograph that made his blood run cold. It showed all 28 students standing in what appeared to be this very tunnel, but they weren't alone. Behind them, partially obscured in shadows, stood several adult figures whose faces had been deliberately scratched out with something sharp. Detective Grimshaw carefully removed the photograph from the wall. On the back, written in precise handwriting, were the words, "The Chosen Ones. Final Selection. October 14th, 1998. The tunnels extended far beyond what Sarah's crew had initially discovered. Following the main passage, Grimshaw found himself in a larger chamber that had clearly been used as some kind of meeting room. Wooden benches were arranged in concentric circles around a raised platform. On the walls, painted in faded black letters, were phrases that made the detective's skin crawl. Surrender the past. Embrace the new truth. Only through sacrifice comes enlightenment. But it was what he found next that would crack this 25-year-old case wide open. Hidden beneath one of the benches was a leather journal, its pages yellowed but still legible. The handwriting inside was that of a teenager, urgent and frightened. Day 23. They're calling it preparation, but I know what this really is. Dr. Whitmore says we've been chosen for something special, something that will change the world. But Emma tried to leave yesterday, and they wouldn't let her. They said she hadn't reached full enlightenment yet. I'm scared. I want to go home, but they keep telling us our families have agreed to let us stay. I don't believe them anymore. The journal was signed M.H. Melissa Hartwell, one of the 28 missing students. Detective Grimshaw photographed every page before continuing his investigation. The journal revealed a horrifying truth. The students hadn't vanished suddenly. They had been gradually isolated and manipulated by faculty members who were part of some kind of cult operating within the school. Dr. Adrian Whitmore, according to Melissa's entries, was the leader. The Academy's respected psychology professor had been using his position to identify vulnerable students, those from broken homes or with family problems, and slowly indoctrinate them into his twisted belief system. The tunnels led to additional chambers, each serving a different purpose in what appeared to be an elaborate compound. Grimshaw discovered sleeping quarters with 28 narrow beds, a kitchen area, and most disturbing of all, what could only be described as isolation cells. In one of these cells, carved into the stone wall, were the desperate words, "My name is David Chen. I am 17 years old. My parents live in Boston. I will not forget who I am." But it was in the deepest part of the tunnel system that Detective Grimshaw made the discovery that would change everything. Behind a steel door that had been welded shut, he found evidence that some of the students had tried to escape. Personal belongings were scattered across the floor, a class ring, a torn photograph, and a letter that was never sent. The letter was addressed to the parents of Jennifer Walsh, one of the missing students. "Mom and Dad, if you're reading this, then I found a way to get this out. We're not at the academy anymore. Dr. Whitmore and the others moved us to a compound somewhere in the mountains. I think it's in Vermont or New Hampshire. They keep telling us we're part of something important, but people who ask questions disappear. Please find us. Please don't give up. Love, Jenny." The letter was dated October 20th, 1998, 5 days after the official disappearance. Detective Grimshaw immediately contacted the FBI. If the students had been moved to a compound, there might still be survivors. The investigation that followed would uncover one of the most sophisticated cult operations in American history. Dr. Adrian Whitmore, it turned out, had been planning his operation for years. Using his position at Ravenshollow Academy, he had identified students from wealthy families who were struggling academically or socially. He convinced their parents that intensive therapy and isolation would help their children succeed. What the parents didn't know was that Whitmore was gradually cutting the students off from the outside world, using a combination of psychological manipulation and mild drugs to make them compliant. The underground chambers at Ravenshollow had been his testing ground, a place to perfect his techniques before moving his chosen ones to a remote compound. The FBI raid on the compound in New Hampshire came 25 years too late for most of the students, but in a cabin deep in the woods, they found her. Rachel Morrison had been 17 when she disappeared from Ravenshollow Academy. Now 42, she was found living in a small room, convinced that the outside world had ended, and that she was one of the last survivors of humanity. "The others," she whispered, when FBI agents first approached her. Dr. Whitmore said the others weren't ready. He said they had to be purified first. Rachel's rescue and slow reintegration into society would take months, but gradually, she began to remember and reveal the horrifying truth about what had happened to her classmates. According to Rachel's testimony, Dr. Whitmore's compound had been operational for years before 1998. The Ravenshollow students were just his latest recruits, but something had gone wrong with his plan. Several students had begun to rebel, led by a charismatic senior named Michael Torres. Michael convinced 6 others to try to escape, Rachel told Detective Grimshaw during one of their carefully supervised interviews. Dr. Whitmore was furious. He said they had been corrupted by negative influences and needed to be cleansed. The FBI's investigation into the New Hampshire compound revealed the remains of 19 individuals buried in a mass grave behind the main building. Forensic analysis confirmed that these were indeed the missing Ravenshollow students, along with several other victims from different schools. Dr. Adrian Whitmore had died in 2015, taking most of his secrets with him. But his operation had been larger than anyone imagined, with contacts at multiple prestigious schools across New England. The investigation uncovered evidence of similar disappearances at 3 other academies, all following the same pattern. Detective Grimshaw's investigation into the Ravenshollow case led to the identification of 12 other cult members, including several who were still alive and operating under false identities. The network had been recruiting vulnerable young people for decades, using the prestige and trust associated with elite educational institutions as cover. Rachel Morrison's survival was nothing short of miraculous. She had been kept isolated for years, told that her family was dead, and that Dr. Whitmore was her only protection from a world that had supposedly been destroyed by war and disease. It was only his death and the compound's gradual abandonment by other cult members that had allowed her to survive. The investigation also revealed why the original police inquiry had been so ineffective. Dr. Whitmore had influential connections, including a state senator whose own son had attended Ravenshollow. Pressure had been applied to keep the investigation low-key, to avoid scandal that might damage the reputations of the families involved. As Detective Grimshaw stood once again at the gates of Ravenshollow Academy, now reduced to rubble, he reflected on the 28 young lives that had been lost to one man's twisted vision of enlightenment. But he also thought about Rachel Morrison, who was slowly rebuilding her life, and about the other potential victims who had been saved by this investigation. The case files would show that Detective Grimshaw's investigation had not only solved a 25-year-old mystery, but had also exposed a criminal network that might have continued operating for years to come. Justice for the 28 students of Ravenshollow Academy had finally been served. In Rachel Morrison's first interview with the media, she said something that would stay with Detective Grimshaw for the rest of his career. "Dr. Whitmore told us that the outside world had forgotten about us, that no one was looking anymore. But someone was. Someone never stopped believing we mattered. The Ravenshollow Academy case would become one of Detective Grimshaw's most significant investigations, not just because it solved a decades-old mystery, but because it reminded everyone that some secrets are too important to stay buried forever." As always, Detective Grimshaw had proven that in every shadow lies a secret, and in every secret lies the truth. Note: this story is fictional, and Detective Grimshaw is a character created for entertainment purposes.